It's usually not very decent to talk about a woman's age, but I think today we're allowed to.
Of course.
You took office at the rather young age of 37 when you became Prime Minister. Was that an advantage or a disadvantage for you?
Look, I mean, I think you probably could argue it either way. I think, for me, I'd been in politics, I'd been in Parliament for 15 years.
So it's not the age that counts, but the experience.
Well, it should be. I think that should be the measure. I came into politics young, that's true, but at a time when they were really looking for youth and youth to enter into our Parliament to make it feel representative.
Mm-hmm. You describe how you very often doubted yourself. Can you explain how that maybe helped you or not to become the Prime Minister that you were?
You're right. I did not expect or seek to become either leader of my party or Prime Minister. And in large part, that was because so many of the character traits that I believed you needed to be in politics, let alone in political leadership, I never felt I had. I was thin-skinned, I was relatively sensitive, I really prized empathy and kindness as values. And those weren't things that I saw often around me in politics.
Did you question yourself? Am I able to do this? Will I pull it off?
Oh, I mean, I've been very open about the fact that, whether you call it imposter syndrome or whether you call it a confidence gap, I've had that persistently my whole life. But what I did find is in that moment when you're suddenly called upon and there's an expectation on you, your sense of responsibility can actually outweigh any lack of confidence that you may feel.
You're a very empathetic leader. A lot of people make the association with soft power.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I think unfortunately there is an assumption that empathy, kindness, this is also shorthand for weak, indecisive, lacking resilience, and I completely disagree. In my experience, when you're motivated by, traits like empathy and kindness, you're very clear-eyed about why you're there, you're motivated to make change, you're focused on people-centric policy making. It makes you in many ways much more decisive, not less. And I think actually it builds up diplomacy skills that are much needed in this current era of politics that we're in, and is, I think, a needed alternative to this what we call a strongman style that we see at the moment.
Is there always a place for empathy, or do you have to put it away sometimes?
I led through a domestic terror attack, the worst New Zealand has ever experienced, a volcanic eruption, a pandemic and the economic crisis that ensues. I was also in power during the invasion of Ukraine. Empathetic leadership does not mean that you aren't able to identify a clear victim and a clear aggressor. It doesn't mean that you're not decisive. In fact, in crisis leadership, I think it's a very necessary set of traits that, again, makes you clear-eyed on the action that is required in any circumstance.
New Zealand was the first country, if I'm correct, to grant women the right to vote.
That's right. The first country in the world to give, to ensure women had the right to vote. I was the third female Prime Minister, but you're right, I was the second in the world to have a baby in office, and that was something new entirely. And I felt during that period a real obligation to show you could be a mother and a leader and not have any one of those impact on the other. And I think, women and caregivers in all walks of life experience that same struggle. How do you be the best at both?
Being a Prime Minister, it comes with a responsibility, being a mom as well, for all the women who are struggling, because if you can manage, it empowers a lot of women, but if you can't, you fail them as well.
Once my daughter arrived, there was a new struggle. How do I also not lift the bar so high that suddenly there's this expectation that women everywhere do everything? Look, there's a female Prime Minister, she can do it. Why can't everyone else? And so I became conscious of always highlighting that I was lucky I had support. But more than that, I wanted all women to have support. I wanted them to be able to make choices in life around caregiving and work. So I tried to translate it into policy, not just images of me out there being a mum.
There's a very symbolic picture of you in United Nations with your baby.
I didn't think too much about the symbolism of that until after. It might have looked like a magical moment, but behind the scenes I was struggling with breastfeeding and adjusting children to time zones and just juggling different things. And I think that's such a universal experience in lots of ways.
Would you have to conclude an advice to young and ambitious women out there? Because it's still, unfortunately, in politics and elsewhere, very often a man's world.
Self-doubt, the empathy, we see them all as weaknesses. And what I would say to anyone who is seeking some advice, they're strengths. Humility in politics, preparation, anticipating risk, having empathy and compassion, these are strengths. And we need more of them. So I would encourage anyone who's considering it to think about putting themselves forward, because you just never know what you are capable of until you're doing it.